The December wind bit through Preston Quinlan's coat like 1,000 needles as he guided his horse through the mountain pass. Snow falling so thick he could barely see 10 feet ahead. And that was when he heard a sound that made him pull back hard on the reins, the unmistakable sound of someone crying. He sat perfectly still for a moment, listening past the howling wind. There it was again, softer now, a woman's voice broken by sobs. Preston had been riding for 3 days straight from his ranch outside Jordan Valley, Oregon, heading toward the lumber camps in the high country to collect payment for the horses he had delivered last month. The year was 1884, and winter had come early and harsh to the mountains. Any sensible person would have turned back days ago, but Preston needed that money to keep his ranch afloat through the winter. The crying grew louder as he urged his horse forward, and then he saw her, a figure hunched in the snow beside the frozen creek bed, her dark blue dress barely visible against the white landscape. She was alone, no horse or wagon in sight, and she was shaking so violently that Preston could see it from 20 feet away. "Madam," he called out, dismounting quickly and leading his horse toward her. "Madam, are you hurt?" The woman looked up, and Preston felt his breath catch in his chest. Even with her face red from cold and tears streaming down her cheeks, she was beautiful, dark blonde hair falling loose from its pins, green eyes wide with fear and exhaustion, and lips that trembled as she tried to speak. I cannot," she stammered, her voice breaking. "I cannot go any further. Please just leave me, let me rest here." "You will freeze to death before sunset," Preston said firmly, kneeling beside her in the snow. "Where is your horse? Where were you headed?" She shook her head, tears flowing faster now. "Gone. Everything is gone. My husband died 2 weeks ago. Influenza. We had debts, so many debts. They took our house, our farm. I was trying to reach my sister in Baker City, but my horse bolted yesterday when a cougar screamed. I have been walking since dawn, and I just cannot anymore. I have nothing left." Preston looked at this woman, this stranger whose name he did not even know yet, and saw in her eyes a pain that went deeper than cold or hunger. He saw the kind of despair that could break a person completely. Without thinking, without hesitating, he did what his mother had raised him to do. "Let me carry your burdens," he said quietly, reaching out to help her stand. "I cannot leave you here to die. My name is Preston Quinlan, and I have a good horse and warm blankets. Let me get you somewhere safe." She stared at him as if he had spoken a foreign language. "You do not understand. I have no money. I cannot pay you. I have nothing to offer you." "I am not asking for payment," Preston said, already shrugging out of his heavy wool coat and wrapping it around her shoulders. "I am asking you to hold on just a little longer. What is your name?" "Katherine," she whispered. "Katherine Brennan. Well, Katherine Brennan, today your luck changes. Can you stand?" She tried, but her legs gave out immediately. Preston caught her before she hit the ground, and without another word he lifted her into his arms. She weighed almost nothing, and he realized with a cold anger that she had probably not eaten properly in days, maybe weeks. He settled her onto his horse, then climbed up behind her, pulling his bedroll blankets around both of them. "There is a way station about 5 miles east," he said into her ear, feeling her shiver against him. "We can make it before full dark if we push hard. Hold onto the saddle horn and lean back against me. I will not let you fall." Katherine did as he instructed, and Preston felt her body gradually relax as his warmth began to seep into her. He urged his horse forward, one arm wrapped securely around her waist, the other holding the reins. The snow continued to fall, and the temperature continued to drop, but Preston kept them moving steadily eastward. "Why are you helping me?" Katherine asked after they had been riding for nearly an hour. Her voice was stronger now, though still quiet. Preston was silent for a moment, considering his answer. "My father died when I was 12, he finally said. Left my mother with 4 children and a ranch that was barely surviving. The neighbors could have let us fail, probably should have, by the cold logic of business, but they did not. They helped us bring in the harvest that year. They gave us seed for the spring planting. They taught me how to break horses and manage cattle. They carried our burdens until we could stand on our own again. My mother always told me that kindness is not something you repay to the person who gave it to you, you pass it forward to the next person who needs it." He felt Catherine's body shake, and for a moment he thought she was crying again. But when she spoke, he heard something different in her voice, a fragile hope. "Your mother sounds like a remarkable woman." "She was," Preston said softly. "She died last spring, pneumonia, but she raised me right, and I aim to honor that." They rode on in silence, and by the time the way station came into view, a rough log building with smoke rising from its chimney, the snow had begun to ease. Preston helped Katherine down from the horse, keeping a steadying hand on her elbow as they made their way to the door. The way station keeper, a grizzled man named Silas who Preston had known for years, took one look at Catherine's condition and immediately ushered them inside. "Got a room in the back," Silas said, already moving toward the fireplace with an armload of wood. "Get her warm. I will heat up some stew." Preston guided Katherine to a chair near the fire and knelt to remove her frozen boots. Her stockings were soaked through, and her feet were dangerously cold. He rubbed them gently between his hands, trying to restore circulation, while Katherine sat perfectly still, watching him with those extraordinary green eyes. "You do not have to do this," she said quietly. "You do not owe me anything." "I know," Preston replied, not looking up from his task. "But I want to. Now hush and let me work." Silas brought over 2 bowls of thick venison stew and a pot of strong coffee. Katherine ate slowly at first, as if she had forgotten how, and then with increasing hunger. Color began to return to her cheeks, and Preston felt some of the tension in his chest ease. She was going to be all right. "Where were you headed before you found me?" Katherine asked when she had finished eating. "Lumber camp up near the summit," Preston said, sipping his coffee. "They owe me $400 for horses I delivered last month. I need that money to buy feed for my herd through the winter." Catherine's face fell. "And now you are delayed because of me. I am so sorry." Preston shook his head firmly. "The camp will still be there tomorrow or the next day. Your life would not have lasted the night. Do not apologize for surviving, Katherine." The way he said her name sent a small shiver through her that had nothing to do with the cold. She studied him in the firelight, this tall, broad-shouldered cowboy with dark brown hair and eyes the color of strong whiskey. He had a face that had seen hard work and harder winters, but there was a gentleness in the way he moved, a quiet strength that made her feel safe for the first time in months. "Tell me about your ranch," she said, wanting to know more about this man who had appeared in her darkest moment like an answer to a prayer. She had not even known she was praying. Preston's face softened. "It is not much, 160 acres in the valley below the mountains, about 20 miles from Jordan Valley. Good grazing land, a creek that never runs dry. I run about 50 head of cattle and break horses for the cavalry and the lumber companies. It is hard work, but it is mine. Bought it with money I saved from 8 years of working as a wrangler for the big outfits. Built the house and barn with my own hands." "It sounds wonderful," Katherine said, and she meant it. "My husband and I had a small farm near Boise. Just 20 acres, but we grew wheat and kept chickens and pigs. It was enough, or it would have been, if he had not borrowed money to expand. He meant well, but he was not a good judge of business. When the crop failed 2 years ago, we could not repay the loans. And then he got sick, and the medical bills. Her voice broke, and she pressed her hands to her face. Preston moved his chair closer and placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. You do not have to talk about it if it hurts too much. Katherine shook her head, lowering her hands. No, I want to. I need to. For 2 weeks I have been holding everything inside, pretending to be strong, but the truth is I am terrified. My husband was not a bad man, but he was not. We were not. She struggled to find the words. It was an arranged marriage. Our parents thought we would be a good match. We tried to make it work, but there was no love between us, only obligation. And now he is gone, and I feel guilty because I am not mourning him the way a wife should mourn her husband. I am just relieved that it is over, and that makes me a terrible person. It makes you honest, Preston said quietly. There is no shame in admitting the truth, even when the truth is hard. You gave him years of your life, tried to make the best of a difficult situation. That is more than many people would have done. Katherine looked up at him, eyes shining with unshed tears. How can you be so understanding? You do not even know me. I know enough, Preston said, his amber eyes holding hers. I know you are strong enough to walk through a blizzard trying to reach safety. I know you are brave enough to tell the truth even when it hurts. That is all I need to know. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the fire crackling between them. Silas appeared with blankets and showed Katherine to the small back room where she could sleep. Preston made himself comfortable on a bedroll near the fire, his thoughts full of green eyes and a woman's quiet courage. The storm had passed by morning, leaving the world covered in a fresh blanket of white. Preston was already up and tending to his horse when Katherine emerged from the back room, her hair neatly pinned and her dress brushed clean of snow. Good morning, she said softly. How much do I owe Silas for the room and food? Already taken care of, Preston said, tightening his saddle cinch. We should head out soon if you feel strong enough. The trail to Baker City splits off about 10 miles south of here. I can take you that far before I head up to the lumber camp. Katherine bit her lip, a conflict clear on her face. Finally, she said, I need to be honest with you about something. I do not think my sister will be able to help me much. She and her husband have 6 children and barely enough to feed themselves. I was going to her because I had nowhere else to go, but I do not want to burden them. Preston studied her for a long moment. What do you want to do, Katherine? If you could choose any path, what would it be? The question seemed to startle her. I do not know. No one has ever asked me what I want. I am asking now. Katherine wrapped her arms around herself, thinking, I want to work. I want to earn my own way. I am good with numbers. I kept all the books for our farm, and I can cook and sew and tend animals. I am not afraid of hard work. I just need someone to give me a chance. An idea was forming in Preston's mind, crazy and impulsive and completely unlike his usual careful nature. But something about this woman called to something deep inside him, and he found himself saying words he had not planned. Come back to Jordan Valley with me, he said. The general store is looking for someone to help with bookkeeping. Old Mr. Henderson mentioned it last time I was in town. His eyesight is failing and his daughter just moved to Portland. And the boarding house always needs help. You could stay there until you get on your feet, earn enough to decide what you want to do next. Katherine stared at him. You would do that? Help me find work? Why not? Preston said, trying to sound casual even though his heart was pounding. Jordan Valley is a good town, full of decent people. And you will need a job wherever you end up. Might as well be somewhere you already know one person. A slow smile spread across Katherine's face, the first real smile Preston had seen from her, and it transformed her completely. All right, she said. Yes, I will come with you to Jordan Valley. They set out an hour later, heading southwest toward the valley. Preston had sent word to the lumber camp through a rider who stopped at the way station, telling them he would collect his payment next week. The money could wait. Getting Katherine settled could not. The ride took 2 full days, camping one night in a protected grove of pines where Preston built a fire, and they shared his supplies of dried beef and hardtack. They talked through the evening about his life as a horsebreaker, about her childhood in a small Idaho farming community, about their dreams and disappointments, and the strange paths that had brought them to this moment. "What made you decide to become a rancher?" Katherine asked as they sat by the fire, wrapped in blankets against the cold. "Freedom," Preston said without hesitation. "When you work for someone else, you live by their rules, their schedule, their decisions. I wanted to build something that was mine, where I could make the choices and live with the consequences. It is not easy some years. I barely break even, but it is worth it. Every fence post I drive, every calf born on my land, every horse I train, they are all mine. No one can take that away from me." Katherine gazed into the flames, her expression thoughtful. "I have never had that. Freedom. My parents chose my husband. My husband chose where we lived, what we planted, how we spent our money. Even now, running away, I am still following someone else's plan, going to my sister because it seemed like the only option. But you are right. Maybe Jordan Valley is where I can finally start making my own choices." "I think you already started," Preston said, looking at her across the fire. "When you accepted my help yesterday, when you decided to come with me instead of going to your sister, those were your choices, Katherine. You are already free. You just have to get used to it." She met his eyes, and something passed between them in that moment, a recognition, a connection that went deeper than words. Katherine felt her heart beat faster, and she knew with sudden certainty that this man, this kind and steady cowboy, was going to change her life in ways she could not yet imagine. They reached Jordan Valley late the following afternoon. The town sat in a wide valley surrounded by snow-capped mountains, a collection of wooden buildings lining a single main street. Preston pointed out the landmarks as they rode in: the general store, the boarding house, the church, the blacksmith shop, the saloon. "It is small," he said, "but it is home." He took Katherine directly to the boarding house, a neat 2-story building run by a widow named Mrs. Sarah Palmer. Preston explained the situation carefully, leaving out the more personal details, and Mrs. Palmer agreed immediately to let Katherine stay in exchange for help with cooking and cleaning until she could find paid work. "You poor dear," Mrs. Palmer said, taking Katherine's hand. "You come right in and get warm. I will show you to a room and we can talk about arrangements over supper." Preston left Katherine there, promising to return the next morning to take her to the general store. As he rode the final few miles to his ranch in the fading light, he found himself thinking about the way Katherine's hand had felt in his when he helped her dismount, the sound of her laugh when he told her a story about a stubborn horse, the grateful look in her eyes when she thanked him for his kindness. He barely knew this woman. He had met her less than 3 days ago. But already he could not imagine his life without her in it, and that realization scared him more than any blizzard or wild horse ever had. The next morning, Preston was back in town early, freshly shaved and wearing his best shirt. He told himself it was just courtesy, but he knew he was lying. He wanted to look good for Katherine, wanted to see her smile when she saw him. She was waiting on the porch of the boarding house, wearing a simple brown dress that Mrs. Palmer had loaned her. Her hair was braided and pinned up, and she looked rested and hopeful. "Good morning," she said, and Preston heard genuine happiness in her voice. "Morning," he replied, offering his arm to help her down the steps. "Mr. Henderson opens the store at 8. We are right on time." The general store was warm and crowded with merchandise, everything from sacks of flour to horse tack to bolts of fabric. Henry Henderson stood behind the counter, a tall, thin man with white hair and spectacles that he constantly adjusted as his failing eyesight struggled to focus. "Preston," he called out. "Good to see you, son. What can I do for you?" Preston guided Katherine forward. "Mr. Henderson, this is Katherine Brennan. She is new to Jordan Valley and looking for work. I remember you mentioning you needed help with the bookkeeping." Henderson squinted at Katherine, then broke into a wide smile. "Is that so? Can you cipher, young lady?" "Yes, sir," Katherine said confidently. "I managed all the accounts for our farm, tracked expenses, calculated profits, handled correspondence with grain buyers. I am also neat and organized, and I learn quickly." "Well, you are hired," Henderson said without hesitation. "My eyes are getting so bad I can barely read my own handwriting anymore. My daughter used to help me, but she moved away last month. The books are in a terrible state. When can you start?" Katherine glanced at Preston, her eyes bright with excitement. "Right now, if you need me." "Perfect. Let me show you the office." Preston watched as Henderson led Katherine to a small room behind the counter, showing her the ledgers and explaining his system. She asked intelligent questions and took notes, and Preston could see Henderson warming to her immediately. When she emerged an hour later, she was beaming. "He is paying me $30 a month, plus a discount on anything I need from the store. Preston, I do not know how to thank you." "You do not need to thank me," Preston said, though her happiness made his chest feel warm. "You earned this yourself. Henderson is lucky to have you." Over the next few weeks, Katherine settled into life in Jordan Valley. She worked 6 days a week at the general store, quickly organizing Henderson's chaotic records and implementing a new system that made everything run more smoothly. In the evenings and on Sundays, she helped Mrs. Palmer at the boarding house. She made friends: the doctor's wife, the school teacher, the blacksmith's daughter. She went to church socials and quilting bees and gradually became part of the community. And through it all, Preston was there. He came into town twice a week for supplies, always stopping by the store to say hello. He invited Katherine to ride out to his ranch to see the horses. He brought her wildflowers from the meadow near his property. He taught her to ride properly, patiently correcting her seat and her hold on the reins until she could canter without fear. They were falling in love, though neither of them said it out loud. It was there in the way Preston's hand would linger on Katherine's waist when he helped her mount her horse. It was there in the way Katherine's face lit up whenever she saw him riding down the street. It was there in the long conversations they had sitting on the porch of the boarding house, talking until the stars came out and Mrs. Palmer had to remind them that it was getting late. But Katherine held back, and Preston respected her caution. She had only been widowed for 2 months. The people of Jordan Valley knew she was a widow, but they did not know the full story of her marriage. She worried about propriety, about what people would think if she showed interest in another man so soon. "Give it time," Mrs. Palmer advised when Katherine confided in her. "The heart knows what it wants, but the world has its rules. Wait until spring, at least. Let people see that you are respectable and serious. Then, if Preston still comes calling, and that man will still be calling, mark my words, you can see where things lead." But fate had other plans. It was late February when the trouble started. A man rode into town asking questions about Katherine, a tall man with cold eyes and a scar across his left cheek. He claimed to be a debt collector representing the bank that had foreclosed on Katherine's farm. He said Katherine owed an additional $300 in outstanding debt, and he had legal authority to collect it. Katherine went white when she heard the news. "That is impossible," she told Preston when he came to the boarding house after hearing about the stranger. My husband's debts were settled when they took the farm. They took everything, the land, the house, the animals, even most of my clothes. There should be nothing left to owe. Let me look at the papers he is showing, Preston said grimly. The man he gave his name as Calvin Sharp was staying at the saloon. Preston found him there and demanded to see his legal documents. Sharp produced a sheaf of official-looking papers, but when Preston studied them carefully, he found discrepancies. The dates did not match up. The signature of the bank official looked wrong, and the amount owed kept changing each time Sharp mentioned it. "This is a fraud," Preston said flatly. "You are no debt collector. You are a con man trying to prey on a widow." Sharp's eyes turned dangerous. "That is a serious accusation, Cowboy." "You have proof." "I know the bank president in Boys," Preston said, which was true. "I will send him a telegram tomorrow asking about this supposed debt. If he confirms it, Katherine will make arrangements to pay. If he does not, and I am betting he does not, you will get on your horse and ride out of this town before I have the sheriff arrest you for fraud." Sharp stood up slowly, his hand drifting toward his belt. Preston noticed for the first time that the man was carrying a gun. "Maybe I do not feel like waiting for your telegram." "Then we have a problem," Preston said quietly. He was unarmed, he rarely carried a gun in town, but he stood his ground. "Because I am not letting you anywhere near Katherine Brennan." The saloon had gone quiet, other men watching the confrontation with interest. The bartender, a former cavalry sergeant named Tom Wright, casually picked up the shotgun he kept behind the bar. "I think you should listen to Preston," Wright said conversationally. "We do not take kindly to men who harass women in this town." Sharp looked around, saw he was outnumbered and forced a smile. "No need for trouble. I will wait for your telegram. But if that debt is real, the lady pays up or I take her to court." He walked out, and Preston immediately headed to the telegraph office. He sent a message to the bank president, a man named Richard Thornton, who had bought horses from Preston several times. The reply came back the next morning. "No outstanding debts. Stop accounts settled in full. Stop who is making false claims. Stop." Preston showed the telegram to Katherine, who nearly collapsed with relief. Then he went looking for Calvin Sharp, but Sharp was gone. He had left town sometime during the night. His horse and belongings vanished from the stable. Preston sent telegrams to the sheriffs in the surrounding counties, warning them about the con man, but he doubted they would catch him. Men like Sharp were good at disappearing. "It is over," Preston told Katherine as they sat in the office at the general store. "He was lying, just like I thought. You are safe." Katherine was trembling, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "What if you had not been here? What if I had been alone when he came? I would have believed him. I would have tried to find the money somehow, worked myself to death trying to pay a debt that did not exist." Preston reached out and took her hands in his. They were cold despite the warmth of the room. "But I was here," he said softly, "and I always will be if you want me." Katherine looked up, her green eyes searching his face. "What are you saying, Preston?" He took a deep breath, knowing this was too soon, that he should wait, that it would be more proper to court her slowly and formally. But the fear he had felt when he thought someone might hurt her, the fierce protectiveness that had risen in him, would not let him stay silent. "I am saying that I love you, Katherine Brennan. I have loved you since the moment I saw you crying in the snow and you looked at me with those brave, frightened eyes. I love your strength and your honesty and the way you smile when you think no one is watching. I know it is too soon. I know people will talk. I know you probably need more time. But I had to tell you because life is short and unpredictable, and I do not want to waste another day pretending I feel anything less than completely in love with you." Tears spilled down Katherine's cheeks, but she was smiling. "It is not too soon," she whispered, "because I love you too. I think I started falling in love with you when you said you would carry my burdens, when you wrapped me in your coat and refused to leave me in the snow. You saved my life, Preston. Not just from the cold, from despair, from giving up. You showed me that there are good men in this world, men who keep their promises and help without expecting anything in return. How could I not love you? Preston stood and pulled her up with him, into his arms. She came willingly, wrapping her arms around his waist and resting her head against his chest. They stood like that for a long moment, just holding each other, feeling the solid reality of this thing between them. "Marry me," Preston said into her hair. "Not right away, whenever you are ready. But marry me, Katherine. Let me spend the rest of my life carrying your burdens and sharing my own with you." Katherine pulled back just enough to look up at him. "Are you sure? People will say I am moving too fast, that I am a heartless widow who did not properly mourn." "Let them say what they want," Preston said fiercely. "You and I know the truth. That is all that matters." "Then yes," Katherine said, rising on her toes to kiss him softly. "Yes, I will marry you, Preston Quinlan, whenever you want, wherever you want. Yes." They decided to wait until late April, partly out of respect for convention and partly to give Katherine time to prepare. Mrs. Palmer was delighted and immediately began organizing the details. The whole town, it seemed, was excited about the wedding. Katherine had become well-liked in her months in Jordan Valley, and Preston was a respected member of the community. People were happy to see two good people finding love together. Preston used the waiting time to prepare his ranch. He added a room onto his house, built new furniture, and made sure everything was comfortable and welcoming for his future wife. Katherine helped him pick out curtains and dishes from the general store, and they spent hours planning their future together. "I want children," Katherine admitted one Sunday as they walked along the creek that ran through Preston's property. "At least 2, maybe more." "Is that something you want?" "I want everything with you," Preston said simply. "Children, a home full of laughter, growing old together, all of it." The wedding took place on the last Saturday in April, in the small church at the center of town. Katherine wore a simple cream-colored dress that she had sewn herself, with wildflowers in her hair. Preston wore his best suit, his dark hair neatly combed, his eyes shining with happiness as he watched Katherine walk down the aisle toward him. The ceremony was short and sweet, the vows traditional but heartfelt. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Preston kissed Katherine with such tenderness that several women in the congregation dabbed at their eyes with handkerchiefs. The reception was held at the boarding house, with tables set up in the yard and food provided by half the town. There was music and dancing and toasts to the happy couple. As the sun set and the party continued, Preston and Katherine slipped away, riding together to his ranch, their ranch now, to begin their new life. The first months of marriage were an adjustment, as they always are. Katherine learned the rhythms of ranch life, the early mornings, the constant work, the unpredictability of weather and animals. Preston learned to share his space and his life with another person, to consider someone else's needs and wants alongside his own. But they were both willing to compromise, to communicate, to work through the small conflicts that arose. And at night, in the privacy of their bedroom, they learned each other in the most intimate ways. Preston was patient and tender, careful not to push Katherine too fast. Her marriage had not been cruel, but it had not been passionate either, and she was discovering for the first time what it meant to truly desire someone and be desired in return. Preston made her feel beautiful, cherished, safe. She blossomed under his attention, becoming more confident and adventurous. By midsummer, they had settled into a comfortable routine. Katherine continued to work part-time at the general store, a few hours each week to keep the books organized. The rest of her time was spent managing the household and helping Preston with the ranch work. She learned to rope and brand cattle, to recognize the signs of illness in horses, to read the weather and predict when storms were coming. Preston taught her everything patiently, never making her feel foolish when she made mistakes. In August, Katherine realized she was pregnant. She waited a week to be sure, then told Preston one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "I am going to have a baby," she said simply, taking his hand and placing it on her still flat stomach. "Sometime in late February, the doctor thinks." Preston's face went through a dozen emotions in as many seconds: shock, disbelief, and finally pure joy. He pulled Katherine into his arms and held her tight, his voice thick with emotion when he finally spoke. "A baby. We are going to have a baby. Katherine, I do not even have words." "Happy words, I hope," she teased, though she knew the answer. "The happiest," he confirmed, kissing her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "You have made me the happiest man alive." The pregnancy was not easy. Katherine was sick for the first 3 months, barely able to keep food down. Preston hovered anxiously, making her rest, bringing her weak tea and dry toast, sitting beside her bed and holding her hand through the worst of it. By the 4th month the sickness passed, but she was exhausted all the time. The doctor assured them this was normal, that she just needed rest and good food. Preston hired a woman from town to help with the heavy housework, despite Katherine's protests that they could not afford it. "We can afford whatever keeps you healthy," he said firmly. "You are carrying our child. That is the most important job in the world right now. Everything else can wait." As winter approached and Katherine's belly grew round and obvious, they prepared for the baby's arrival. Preston built a beautiful cradle from oak wood, sanding it smooth and carving their initials into the headboard. Katherine sewed tiny clothes and blankets, her heart full of hope and anticipation. They had survived so much poverty, loss, loneliness, fear, and now they were building something new together. A family. A future. The baby came on a cold night in late February, almost exactly a year after Preston had found Katherine in the snow. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next day. Preston stayed by Katherine's side the entire time, holding her hand, encouraging her, terrified but trying not to show it. Finally, as the sun was setting on the 2nd day, the doctor placed a squalling, red-faced infant in Katherine's arms. "Congratulations," he said with a tired smile. "You have a healthy baby boy." Preston stared at his son in wonder. The baby had a thick head of dark hair and tiny fists that waved furiously in the air. His eyes, when they opened briefly, were deep blue. He was the most beautiful thing Preston had ever seen, except for his wife's exhausted, radiant face. "A boy," Katherine whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Oh, Preston, look at him. He is perfect. What should we name him?" Preston asked, unable to take his eyes off this tiny person they had created together. "Thomas," Katherine said without hesitation. "After your father, Thomas Preston Quinlan." Preston felt his throat tighten with emotion. His father had been dead for over 20 years, but the name still carried weight and meaning. "Thomas. Yes, that is perfect." Little Thomas was a fussy baby, colicky and prone to crying at all hours. The first few months were exhausting for both parents, but they took turns walking him through the house at night, singing lullabies and telling stories until he finally settled. Preston discovered he had a talent for fatherhood. He was patient and gentle with the baby, never frustrated by the crying or the constant needs. "You are wonderful with him," Katherine said one morning, watching her husband carefully change Thomas's diaper. "I knew you would be a good father." "I am just following your example," Preston said, picking up the baby and holding him against his shoulder. You make it look easy, even when I know it is not." As spring came and Thomas grew bigger and less fussy, life on the ranch took on a new rhythm. The cattle were thriving, the horses were in demand, and Preston's reputation as an honest horseman had spread to neighboring counties. Money was still tight, but they were making it work. More importantly, they were happy. Deeply, fundamentally happy in a way that both of them had thought impossible just 2 years earlier. On a warm afternoon in May, Katherine and Preston sat on the porch watching Thomas play with a wooden horse that Preston had carved for him. The baby was nearly 3 months old, chubby and healthy, with his father's dark hair and his mother's green eyes. "You ever think about that day in the snow?" Katherine asked quietly. "About how close I came to dying?" Preston reached over and took her hand. "Every day," he admitted. "I think about what would have happened if I had taken a different path, if I had decided to turn back before reaching that pass. I would have missed you. We would never have had this life." Katherine leaned her head on his shoulder. "I used to think I was unlucky, that the universe had singled me out for hardship. But now I understand I had to go through all of that to get here, to you, to this." "We found each other," Preston said, kissing the top of her head. "Two people who needed saving, who needed someone to carry our burdens. And somehow, impossibly, we found each other in the middle of a blizzard on a mountain pass. If that is not fate, I do not know what is." They sat in comfortable silence, watching their son, feeling the warm sun and cool breeze, grateful for every difficult step that had led them to this moment. As the years passed, the Quinlan family grew. 2 years after Thomas came a daughter, Lily Margaret, who had Katherine's delicate features and her father's stubborn determination. She was followed 3 years later by twin boys, Samuel and James, who kept their parents constantly busy with their endless energy and mischief. The ranch prospered. Preston's reputation for breeding and training quality horses spread throughout Oregon and into Idaho. He hired 2 ranch hands to help with the growing herd and built additional barns and corrals. Katherine managed the business side, keeping meticulous records and negotiating fair prices with buyers. Together they built something substantial, a legacy they could pass on to their children. The town of Jordan Valley grew too. A railroad spur was built connecting the valley to the main line, bringing new commerce and new people. The general store expanded, and Mr. Henderson credited Katherine's bookkeeping system with much of his success. When he finally retired in 1895, he sold the store to a young couple from Portland, but only after making them promise to consult with Katherine regularly. Through it all, Preston and Katherine's love deepened and matured. The passionate urgency of their early days together mellowed into something steadier, but no less powerful, a partnership built on trust and respect and genuine friendship, alongside romantic love. They still held hands when they walked. They still kissed goodbye every morning and hello every evening. They still talked for hours about everything and nothing. They still made each other laugh. There were hard times too. A drought in 1890 that killed half their cattle herd and forced them to take out loans. An influenza outbreak in 1893 that nearly killed Thomas and left them terrified for weeks. The death of Mrs. Palmer in 1896, which grieved Katherine deeply. But they faced these challenges together, carrying each other's burdens just as Preston had promised that day in the snow. On their 15th wedding anniversary, Preston took Katherine back to the mountain pass where they had first met. It was a warm July day, nothing like that snowy December afternoon, but the place was recognizable. The same creek bed, the same rocky outcropping, the same view of the valley below. "I was sitting right there," Katherine said, pointing to a flat boulder near the creek. "I remember thinking that I could not take another step, that I was ready to give up, and then I heard your voice calling out to me. I almost rode past, Preston admitted. I was focused on getting to the lumber camp, on collecting my money. But something made me listen more carefully. Maybe it was my mother watching over me, making sure I did not miss the most important moment of my life. Katherine turned to face him, her green eyes still as bright and beautiful as they had been 15 years ago, though her face now showed the lines of laughter and hard work. You saved me that day, not just from the cold, but from a life of loneliness and despair. You gave me everything I never knew I needed. Preston cupped her face in his hands. And you gave me everything I always knew I wanted but thought I would never find: a partner, a friend, a love that makes every day worth living. They kissed there on the mountain pass, two people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful together. The children grew up strong and healthy. Thomas inherited his father's way with horses and took over much of the training work by the time he was 16. Lily showed a talent for numbers like her mother and announced at 14 that she intended to attend college in Portland to study business. The twins were inseparable, always planning some adventure or another, keeping their parents young with their endless energy. In 1901, when Preston was 48 and Katherine 43, they became grandparents for the first time. Thomas, now 22, married a sweet-tempered girl named Anna from a neighboring ranch, and their first child, a baby girl they named Sarah Catherine, arrived that autumn. Preston, holding his granddaughter for the first time, felt the circle of life completing itself. He thought about his own parents, about the lessons they had taught him, about how those lessons had led him to save Katherine and build this family. "What are you thinking about?" Katherine asked, watching her husband cradle the tiny infant with practiced ease. "About how everything connects," Preston said softly. "About how one act of kindness can ripple forward through time, creating more kindness, more love, more life. My parents taught me to help others. That lesson led me to you, and now we have children and grandchildren who will carry those same lessons forward. It is like throwing a stone into water and watching the ripples spread out forever." Katherine moved closer, resting her head on his shoulder, careful not to disturb the sleeping baby. "I think about that too. About the woman I was when you found me broken and hopeless and ready to die. And then I look at everything we have built, all these people who exist because you stopped to help a stranger. It is overwhelming sometimes, in the best possible way." As the new century progressed, the Quinlan ranch continued to thrive. The twins went off to college together, both studying engineering, determined to be part of the modern age. Lily graduated with honors and returned to Jordan Valley to open a consulting business, helping local ranchers and farmers modernize their bookkeeping. Thomas and Anna had 3 more children and expanded their portion of the ranch. Preston and Katherine gradually stepped back from the day-to-day operations, though they never fully retired. They spent their days doing lighter work, Katherine tending her large garden, Preston training the occasional special horse just for the joy of it. They took long rides together through the valley, visited their children and growing number of grandchildren, and enjoyed the peaceful satisfaction of a life well lived. On a crisp December afternoon in 1910, 26 years after their first meeting, Preston and Katherine stood together on the porch of their ranch house watching snow fall gently over the valley. They were both in their late 50s now, their hair streaked with gray, their faces lined by sun and wind and time. But they still held hands like newlyweds, still found comfort in each other's presence. "It is snowing," Katherine said softly, "like the day we met." Preston pulled her closer, wrapping his arm around her waist. "Are you sorry I found you? Even knowing all the hard days we have had, all the struggles, Katherine looked up at him, her green eyes clear and certain. Not for a single second. Every hard day was worth it, Preston. Every struggle, every loss, every moment of fear, they were all worth it to have this life with you. You asked me once to let you carry my burdens. You have been carrying them for 26 years, and I have been carrying yours. That is what love is, I think. Not the absence of burdens, but the willingness to share them. Preston kissed her softly, a kiss that held 26 years of shared history, of joy and sorrow and everything in between. I would do it all again, he said. Every single moment exactly the same, just to end up right here with you. They stood together as the snow continued to fall. Two people who had found each other in the darkness and built a life full of light. Inside the warm house behind them, they could hear the sounds of their family. Thomas and Anna had come for dinner with their children, and Lily had arrived with her new beau, a lawyer from Baker City. The twins were due home from college next week for Christmas. The house would be full of noise and laughter and love. We should go inside, Katherine said, though she made no move to leave. They will be wondering where we are. In a minute, Preston said, holding her close. I just want to stand here with you a little longer, remembering that scared woman I found crying in the snow and the miracle that brought her into my life. Katherine smiled, tears prickling her eyes. She was not scared. She was terrified and lost, and certain she would die alone. But she did not, Preston said firmly. She lived. She thrived. She built a beautiful life and raised amazing children and became the strongest person I know. She is my hero, Katherine. She always has been. They finally went inside into the warmth and light and laughter of their family. And as they sat down to dinner, surrounded by the children and grandchildren who existed because a cowboy had stopped to help a crying woman in the snow, Katherine felt a profound gratitude for every twist and turn that had brought her to this moment. The years continued to pass, marked by births and deaths, triumphs and challenges, the endless turning of seasons. Preston and Katherine grew old together, their bodies slowing but their love never dimming. They watched their grandchildren grow up and have children of their own. They celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary with a huge party attended by half the county. They took care of each other through illnesses and injuries, each one determined to be the last to leave, unwilling to imagine life without the other. Preston died peacefully in his sleep in the winter of 1918, at the age of 65, with Katherine holding his hand. She grieved him deeply, but without bitterness, grateful for the 34 years they had shared. She lived another 8 years, spending them with her children and grandchildren, telling stories about the cowboy who had saved her life and given her a love she had never imagined possible. Katherine Quinlan died in the spring of 1926, at the age of 68, surrounded by her family. Her last words were about Preston, about the day he found her in the snow and offered to carry her burdens. He never let me down, she whispered to Lily, who sat by her bedside. Not once in all our years together. He was the best man I ever knew, and I was blessed beyond measure to be his wife. They buried her next to Preston in the cemetery overlooking Jordan Valley, the mountains rising snow-capped in the distance. The headstones were simple but elegant, carved with their names and the dates that bracketed their lives. And at the bottom of each stone, the family had added the same inscription, words that captured the essence of their love story. He carried her burdens. She carried his. Together they built a life of love. The ranch stayed in the family for generations, each new generation adding to the legacy that Preston and Katherine had started. The story of how they met became family legend, told and retold to children and grandchildren, a reminder that sometimes the darkest moments lead to the greatest blessings, that kindness creates ripples that spread through time, that true love can be found in the most unexpected places. That was the true miracle they understood. Not that Preston had saved Katherine from freezing to death, though that was remarkable enough, but that he had saved her from despair, from hopelessness, from a life of loneliness. And in saving her, he had found his own salvation, a partner who matched his kindness with her own strength, a woman who loved him completely and built a life with him that neither of them could have created alone. Their love story became part of the fabric of Jordan Valley, told whenever anyone spoke of the town's history. The place where Preston found Katherine in the snow became a local landmark, with a small plaque installed in 1950 by their grandchildren. Couples would sometimes make pilgrimages there, standing in the spot where two desperate people had found hope and love against all odds. The last of Preston and Katherine's children, Lily, lived to be 93 years old, dying in 1968. Before her death, she wrote down everything she could remember about her parents, the stories they had told, the lessons they had taught, the love they had shown. Her memoir, privately published for family members, began with these words: "My father once told me that the most important moment of his life was not when he was born, or when he bought his ranch, or even when he married my mother. It was the moment when he heard a stranger crying in a blizzard and decided to stop and help. That single decision," he said, "created everything that came after his marriage, his children, his happiness. It taught me that we are all just one decision away from changing our lives completely, and that the most important decisions are often the ones we make for other people, not ourselves." The Quinlan family continued to thrive through the 20th century and into the 21st. They spread across the country, becoming teachers and doctors and engineers and artists. But many stayed in Oregon, staying connected to the land that Preston and Katherine had worked so hard to build. The original ranch house still stood, preserved and maintained by the family trust, a museum of sorts that future generations could visit to remember where they came from. And on certain winter nights, when the snow fell thick and the wind howled through the valley, people swore they could see two figures on horseback riding through the pass, a tall cowboy and a woman riding behind him, her arms wrapped around his waist, both of them heading home together through the storm. It was just a legend, of course, a romantic story with no basis in reality. But legends exist because they speak to something true, something fundamental about the human experience. Preston and Katherine's story spoke to the truth that love can be found in the darkest moments, that kindness creates miracles, that two broken people can heal each other and build something stronger than either of them could have managed alone. It spoke to the truth that family is not just blood, but the stories we tell and the values we pass down, the lessons that ripple forward through generations. Their great-great-great-grandchildren, living in a world that Preston and Katherine could never have imagined, a world of computers and cell phones and space travel, still told the story of the cowboy who found a woman crying in the snow and offered to carry her burdens. They told it to their own children, keeping the memory alive, making sure that Preston and Katherine's legacy of kindness and love continued to spread outward like ripples on water, touching lives they would never know, creating goodness they could never measure. Because that is what true love does. It does not just change the two people who experience it. It changes everyone around them, everyone who comes after them, everyone who hears their story and thinks, "Yes, that is the kind of love I want. That is the kind of person I want to be." Preston Quinlan and Katherine Brennan found each other on a frozen mountain pass in December 1884, two desperate people in desperate circumstances. They could have been just another tragedy, another story of hardship and loss in the harsh landscape of the Old West. Instead, They became a testament to the power of human kindness, the strength of committed love, and the beautiful life that can be built when two people decide to carry each other's burdens, to face the world together, to never give up on each other no matter how hard things get. That was their legacy. That was their gift to all who came after. And long after their bodies had returned to the earth, long after the ranch had passed through multiple generations, long after the world they knew had transformed into something unrecognizable, their love story remained a beacon of hope, a promise that true love exists, a reminder that sometimes the most important thing we can do is stop and help a stranger, because that stranger might just be the person who changes our life forever. In the end, Preston and Katherine's story was not about grand gestures or dramatic rescues, though those were part of it. It was about the daily choice to love, to support, to carry each other's burdens year after year, through good times and bad, through joy and sorrow, through all the ordinary moments that make up a life. It was about two people who found each other when they both needed finding, who built something beautiful from the ashes of their old lives, who proved that it is never too late for happiness, never too late for love, never too late to start over and build something new. And that, more than anything else, was why their story endured. Because everyone, at some point in their life, needs to believe that redemption is possible, that second chances exist, that love can find us even in our darkest moments. Preston and Katherine lived that truth. They embodied it. And in doing so, they created a legacy that would last forever, carried forward not just in the blood of their descendants, but in the hearts of everyone who heard their story, and dared to hope that they too might find such love, such grace, such perfect happiness against all odds. The snow continued to fall on Jordan Valley, Oregon, winter after winter, year after year, decade after decade. And somewhere in that snow, in the memory of the town and the stories of the family, two souls rode together, still a cowboy and the woman he saved, heading home through the storm, carrying each other's burdens, their love eternal and unbreakable, a light that would never fade.